All right. Well, I will wait, and our outreach director, Maya Swope, who is on the line today as well. She'll, I'm sure, let me know when Representative Her is able to join us. But we have a great conversation today. We're very excited. And before we get into the program, I do want to make a couple announcements about the Friends. We are very excited today, actually. We're one to be hosting this webinar in honor of Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Very important. And something that we're trying to do at the Friends here is, increase access to the boundary waters and the wilderness for people of all communities, and especially the Hmong community as well. And with that in mind, we've actually started a program that some of you may be familiar with called No Boundaries to the Boundary Waters. And what No Boundaries to the Boundary Waters is, it's a program where we work with kids from, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and also rural Minnesota to provide opportunities for them to get into the boundary waters, right? We know that not everybody kind of grows up with that kooky uncle that has the canoe in the garage and can take you up there every weekend, right? And so, but we know this is also part of Minnesota heritage, whether you've been in Minnesota for 5 years or 50 years. And so part of this program, we're providing scholarships to kids to actually get up into the wilderness. And today we can actually announce, through our work, we are working with two predominantly Hmong schools, the Prairie Seeds Academy and Noble Academy. And we're working with them to get them, do some paddle days, get those skills created if they're not there, and then send those scholarships up. And actually today we just learned that we received a grant from the Stand with Asian Community Fund for $25,000 to help supplement sending those kids into the boundary waters. So we're really excited about that. Really excited to be here and to be doing this work. And if anybody's more interested in that, I would encourage you to go to our website and search for No Boundaries for the Boundary Waters. We have great educational resources, and our educational director, Allison, she's awesome, and she'll happy to be answering any questions. So without further ado, if you have any questions during this, we're going to go ahead and get started with Senator Her. And if Representative Her is able to join us, great. If not, we'll definitely have her on another time. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A in the chat, and we'll make sure to get to those. So Senator Her, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really happy to have you. We were commenting that we love your background, and it's very fitting. So why don't we just start off? Can you tell our guests, our members, a little bit about yourself, and then kind of your first experience with Minnesota Northwoods, and how that experience shaped how you view Minnesota?
First of all, I'm an outdoors person, and probably has to do with my heritage. Been a child of Highlanders from the mountain of Laos, and that's was the first 11 years of my life, and then transitioned here as a refugee from Southeast Asia after the Vietnam War. Lived in South Dakota, moved down to Houston, Texas, and then settled for the block of 10 years in the state, Kansas, before I moved to St. Paul, Minnesota, after I graduated from college with a computer science degree and multimedia degree. And it was television opportunity with TPT that brought me here to do the first Hmong live television program professionally made in the country. And back in those days, even though it's not that far away, information superhighway was not there yet, we hardly use that term now, as a matter of fact. And so now is all more social media. So television is quite a communication tool, and so it helped. The program that I produced there called Path to Unity, or Gaegongxie, it helped the Hmong community attune and get them more understanding to the way of life here, because that's within our recent arrival into the country. And so it educated me, as well as I took information and educate the community about health information, environmental information, and so forth. So then I become a self-employed for a number of years after that, and then 25 years later, I decided to run for office in 2012. But within that gap, I have heard about, when I moved to Minnesota in 1991, you can avoid hearing about the boundary water, being, one of the natural wonder in our state. So I always curious that, what it would be like, what it would be like being from the highland of Laos, and how that will help me connect to my outdoors roots, and having appreciation of that. So in 1998, a couple of friends of mine took me up there, and we have, excuse me, we have a wonderful time. Not just that, being in seclusion in the outdoor, and see the quality of water, the natural environment, see the trees that and places that sometimes not touched by human at all. And so that really make me appreciate, how nature can offer you, and how important it is to preserve or push for conservation policy, and to maintain the natural wonder, or the environment that we have during this time is just so precious. And I can go back into a little bit more in detail of that after you ask me a number of serious questions. And I stay on point of the question, but a little bit about myself, I think I already kind of cover in some degree. I'm a videographer. Then I would say a computer programmer turned videographer, video producer, turned politician. I suppose that would be a sum up, but a love of outdoors is constant throughout my life. It's part of me seeking to my heritage of being in the remote area of a certain place, whether it's in Highland or Laos, or imagine where my ancestor, which coming down from China, what it must be like. And the boundary water kind of offer me that serenity and time to meditate and reflect on my current and also my past.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, like you said, we'll get into some of the more serious issues in a second, but that's very inspiring to hear, and we're very fortunate to have you in the Senate, representing those views. We're also glad to have Representative Kaohly Her today joining us. Representative Her, just wanted to start off, maybe you could tell us a little bit, our audience, a little bit about yourself, and then kind of about your first experience with, Minnesota Northwoods, and how that made you want to, how that impacts how you think about conservation today.
Absolutely. And I'm sorry that I was a couple minutes late. I'm having some internet issues here. But so I am actually a state representative in St. Paul, Senate District 64A. And I grew up just like a typical Hmong girl. I was the first generation to sort of grow up here. And so in my generation, girls were not allowed to hunt, to fish, to be outdoors. And the only outdoors experience I had was gardening with my grandmother. But I often wondered when I would see the men fishing, sometimes I would just tag along because I wanted to watch. And I didn't get my own fishing pole, but I could watch. And it was just a really interesting experience to see that I only saw men doing this. And it was something that was always I'd ask my mom, well, I'd like to go. How come I can't be in the woods? How come I can't be on the water? And she'd always tell me that's not a woman's place. And so, this is in the 70s. We were so young at that time. And so as I grew up, I ended up doing it myself anyways, because even though, I would go fishing on my own, or I would do, I would try to figure out ways of to just enjoy the outdoors on my own. I was always outside. But I would say that my first experience with the boundary waters in the Northwoods is I think I was 6 months pregnant with my oldest. So that was in 1997. And we went up and rented a boat and stayed at a camp and went fishing. And it was the best time. And granted, I had to keep coming back in because I needed to use the restroom because I was 6 months pregnant. But it was an amazing experience to be in that big outdoors and to see the depths of the water and to see the beauty that existed, that like oftentimes it is right there and we never get to experience it. It was, to me, just, it was magnificent, and I would never change a moment of it. I was telling my daughter, you were with me up in the Northwoods. You were still inside of me. But it was a really great experience. And I remember thinking, like, this is something that everyone should get to do. This is something that everyone should experience. And so that was my first experience with the Northwoods. But I would say that ever since then, I mean, my husband is a great, outdoorsman, and we do everything from hunting and fishing to just, anytime we can be in the woods of any kind, whether we're foraging or just, hiking or experiencing nature. Like, that's, to us, is the best way to just spend time together, and then also time to reflect, right? Like, it's not just something we do for fun, but something that should be a part of just who we are as we're continuing to grow and learn. And it's the best place to be is in that space. So the impact of this experience and what it had on me was, I often think about when I see clearing of land, when I think about, because I come from a farming community, and my husband's family were dairy farmers. And as I learn about the impact of what we do to our soil and our water and the air, the impact that has on our land, I think about when we introduce species into areas in which they've never been before, when new invasive species enter into those spaces, what it does to the natural ecosystem there, that I actually think about that quite a bit. And I've been thinking about the snails and the flying carp, and also even just like when people who live near water, if they buy plants that don't actually exist, but when they're done, they throw it into the water and new species are growing, our plants are growing into waterways. Like, I think about those things a lot, and about how we change the environment that we're in, and what does that do to the natural wildlife that existed there long before we got there. And so, all of these issues become really important to me as I think about enjoying the outdoors and enjoying, conserving what it is that we have and protecting it, but also ensuring that we keep it in its natural state the best that we can. Like, those things are all very important to me. I think about what we do as humans and the imprint we leave on this earth, and how we need to ensure that, we leave the least amount of our imprint and leave it as natural as it possibly can be. So those are thoughts that I have as I've enjoyed the outdoors and experienced it.
Absolutely. That's great. And I think, you pretty much hit it on the head with the leave no trace, right? That's not just for the boundary waters, right? We need to adopt that in far more areas of our life. And I think that now, next time I'm struggling on a portage, I'm gonna have to think of you and be like, she did it with a baby 6 months pregnant. I need to step it up here and go ahead and get this done. But that's great. So thank you for that. Actually, as you mentioned, the next question for Senator Her, as you mentioned, and growing up, like I was telling Senator Her, I grew up in St. Paul, was fortunate to go to St. Paul public schools and, go to school with a lot of Hmong children. And one thing that you learn right away is fishing is a huge part of the community, and I've heard just, passing by when I'm in the Capitol or things like that. Have you talked to Senator Her? Because he is the fisherman. He's well known for that. So, Senator, can you tell us a little bit about, how the fishing community or fishing is part of the Hmong community, and then kind of your experiences with fishing up in the boundary waters?
Yeah, it's been in our culture, I would say among the various Asian group, our culture are very tied to the environment, fishing, hunting, in addition to that, we're also becoming, the past generation was veterans that served in the Secret War and came to this country because of that. Part of the military past, and we're connected to the environment in terms of hunting and fishing. So as a matter of fact, my father doesn't like fishing. He probably does too in his younger days, but when career and job take you to a different direction, I think the Secret War in Laos had a lot to do with their generation. So, being a military man and all that, I think they're probably, they kind of give up to hold their position. They probably give up, some exploration of outdoors. And I was well connected to my grandfather, who's, very, outdoors, and so it's a relationship that I built with him early on. And so that brings me back with connecting with the outdoors, so I hunting and also fishing as well. And I know that I would say 70% or more of my communities, young and old, in this current day, do take advantage of the lakes and let's see, WMA that we have in our state here. And so I'm one of the members, and I'm glad to live near one of the large lakes in the city of St. Paul, Lake Phelan, where people go out there, and enjoy their day, fishing, and even the beauty of our native shoreline, plant our native shoreline. So yeah, fishing has to be something that you are brought up with at the young age too, So as I was giving example with my grandfather and my father, is quite interesting. Where I see my father as a military man, hold his position of power, and my grandfather is more agrarian and in touch with nature, and that grandfather and grandchildren relationship, brought forth me, who continue to carry on our heritage of outdoor exploring.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think that's a great point for a lot of us to remember that, it is a privilege to be able to have this opportunity, right? Like, I didn't have to go into any military service, right? So I'm able to do certain things, and we all have that, but that's kind of what we're trying to address with our No Boundaries to the Boundary Waters program. Trying to lower those barriers. So that's very interesting, and thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent program that you have, No Boundary, and I know that you, probably going to ask me a question later on this, but I think to get people interested in the great outdoors that we have in our state, Minnesota, we have to start there at the early age, and for the program to reach out to Perry Seed Academy or Noble Academy like you do is an excellent way of getting young people interested. And another part is it also built into our economy too. We also thrive into our outdoors activities. Our economy also thrive in our outdoors activities, both fishing and hunting.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, you're as usual, you're on point here, because that's a great transition. The next question I wanted to ask about it, and I'll give it to Representative Her, and then Senator Her, if you have anything to add, of course, please do. What are some of the barriers, and we're talking about a little bit, what are some of the barriers that exist to wilderness access for Hmong community, and how obviously we're doing the No Boundaries, but what other things can individuals do or organizations like ours do to help lower those barriers, increase that access?
So that's a great question, Scott. And as I was thinking about your question about what it means to be a Hmong leader and how does that impact the BWCA and wilderness protection too, I'm going to lump those in together.
Yes,
because,
please do. Go ahead.
I think that sometimes, people experience the wilderness for different reasons, right? I think that the way our Western culture looks at how we enjoy the wilderness, is sort of like a leisure, a really spiritual experience, something that like we are, one with nature. But, for people like the Hmong people, though that is a really great part of why we do this, we also are intertwined. Hmong people are just a part of nature, right? We rely on the land ever since I can remember, and from what I understand, the history of our people is a way to sustain us. And so when we think about how we, experience the Boundary Waters, we may be fishing to bring back fish, to feed our families. We may be thinking about like the experience of what it means to teach our children to be near nature, to be connected to, culturally who we are as people. Like I remember as a young child, even though I lived in Wisconsin, my grandmother would go to the forest and forage. And that was just right in our backyard, where there was just this little bit of like forest behind us. And that, like, when I think about what I'm seeing young Hmong people do right now is that foraging is still a part of them. I have a friend who is she's maybe 15 years younger than me. And she has young kids, and she and her husband take them out to forage for mushrooms, right? For like and to experience what it's like to be in the wilderness and what you can look for to sustain your life. And so like, I think to help people understand, like there are many reasons why people connect to nature. And so I think that the more we can widen and broaden that message so that people understand that this is here for us in the ways we need to connect with nature, I think that will really help. I also see, like I'm going with a bunch of like professional Hmong women who are just happen to be a network of friends. We're going to the Boundary Waters in July to do a canoe trip. And like, I've never seen that happen before, where a bunch of adult grown women will go without their husbands to just experience this for Hmong people. Maybe it happens a lot in Western culture, but for Hmong people, this is a really big, first for me to see. Or, and I see a lot of young people where they're doing, like mixed gender trips, and that's something that culturally, like, I don't think people realize that usually when people travel and spend time together, it's generally not in mixed genders, because we have a lot of cultural things that, sort of guide how we can socially interact with each other. But I see that in our younger 20s, 30s, something, they much more have taken on Western ideologies or beliefs or societal like norms around what is accepted and what is not, and they are taking trips together. So I think the more that people can see that, like, we're respecting the way the old connect with nature, but we see the new and how they're embracing this and how it looks to them, the more we're going to bring more people into the folds of how do they participate in a way that is meaningful for them, and to show them that it is okay for us to experience it in all different ways. I think those things are really key for us to ensure that we're bringing more people into the folds of this. And I don't know how to do it. I just know that the more we can create images and provide a narrative that it is inclusive in that way, I think the better we will be in bringing more people into this work. I don't know if that helps answer your question at all.
No, it does. I mean, it's a little bit of a tough question, right? It's not something that there's an easy answer, but no, that's very insightful. Senator Her, was there anything that you wanted to add on that point?
Yeah, I think that Representative Her and her women crew will have a wonderful time out there, and do take a lot of picture. I been there ever since 1998. I try to go every year. The only time when I skip a few years, is right at the beginning when I served the Senate. I got busy. That's the only time, and I think I cover about 80% of the entry point so far, and Boundary Water, and I try to bring a multicultural group. There are also, there are also women on my crew. Sometimes someone bring their spouse, and I try to make it, also diverse too. So it's just not Hmong only, or Southeast Asian, but predominantly my crew are Southeast Asian, and that's one way to get them up there. And I try to bring, there's maximum 9 people. So I always try to ensure that 3 people are, veterans to the Boundary Waters, and, then trying to get 1 or 2 newbies that comes along and see if they will enjoy and continue to explore the great Boundary Water. One thing I want to add here, you asked about how we could help bridge the gap of the community, the Southeast Asian community here in the metro, to explore some of the natural wonder that we have in our state. And it takes me back into things that I was uncomfortable in doing, but my elders doing it anyway, and Representative Her had touched upon that a little bit, when I first came here was in my early teens, and as a teenager, you want to be, fit in, want to be cool with the rest of the kids. And here, your grandparent and your parent plant a huge corn in front of your plot, government project housing, and at that time, you just, oh, why am my parent and they're doing this? It doesn't look cool with the other kids are playing basketball. We should have a display. And later on, like 30 years down the road, here I am here, legislate and allocate dollars for urban agriculture. for clean water, and it makes sense. And so when I get elected in 2012, I always give the elders some confidence. And I know this may not fall much into the mainstream culture, and I give them my business card. I give all the elders my business card. Said, when you are out there foraging, whether mushroom, garlic mustard, or Japanese knotweed, like things that, some of them are invasive, but if you walk in public land, that public land is yours, and don't be intimidated. If a conservation officer approach you and you can't communicate with them, just show them my Senate business card. Talk to this guy, So be out there, whether you picking up salmon seal. I know that is not, proper to pick up salmon seal at the public land, but these days, the Hmong community actually grow their own, wild plants, so that they can, share among the communities. So, that's something that I thought I share with folks out there. And we'll get back to the boundary water subject in a few minutes here. So yeah. I just want to give a comparison of things that we did back then that we thought we were violating law, but actually we were helping, America and society as a whole,
Absolutely. No, yeah, go ahead.
Can I just add really quick that I think that when you were talking about like barriers to getting people, I think that it depends on which generation. When you think about our communities, we have older generation who are very much, nature is very second nature to them, but they, have barriers to, access to transportation, right? And the Boundary Waters is far from the Twin Cities. And so, especially with this concentration of people of color, Southeast Asian, the AAPI community. And so I think about like, what does that need to help people be connected to those areas? Because I think that when I think about who is enjoying the BWCA, it's really, people who have access to transportation, younger people who are professionals, who have the income to be able to expend on gas and travel and lodging. And so I know that that's nothing you all can do, but I think that's something for us to be very aware of, in that who has the privilege of enjoying this beautiful area up north, and who doesn't have the ability to actually even, to reach it, or to, even though it seems like right, in their backyard, to be able to access it and reach it. So it's something for us to think through, as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that really is the impetus behind our No Boundaries for the Boundary Waters program is, obviously there's going to be more people that we can't help every single person, but that exactly what you said is key there. And Senator Her, that's an interesting point, right? Because that's something that, at least I personally, when I think about it, I think a lot of people think about, if a conservation officer comes up to me, I'm not worried about being able to communicate with them, right? But that's totally fair. I might not know every single regulation, but I'll feel confident that I can at least, figure it out. But no, that's a great point. And then that's actually something that we want to do at the Friends here is start printing our materials in more than one language. Obviously we also work with the Somali community a lot in the same program, and so, maybe that's something that we could do to be helpful as well. But that's a good point. And, the other thing I wanted to point out is one of our board members is a woman named Lee Vu. And she's awesome. And she actually went through our program a long time ago. Maybe I shouldn't say that, a long time ago. She might not appreciate that. But basically she wrote an article for us, and I'll have Maya share that in the chat, thinking about kind of the advice that she would get from her father and her elders, going out into the wilderness. And it's not wrong or bad. It's just different than what we would think about, right? Or, that I might think about in terms of, making sure that, she stay spiritually safe and things like that. So it's really interesting and definitely good for the rest of us to hear that perspective and think about it. I do want to talk a little bit about, the Boundary Waters specifically in our issues that we talk about. We know that unfortunately, the Boundary Waters are being threatened right now, as well as Lake Superior, from the proposed copper sulfide mines, Twin Metals, and Polymet. Both Senator Her and Representative Her here were big supporters and are big supporters of our Prove It First legislation that would require any copper mine to first show that it has been operating for 10 years and been closed for 10 years without polluting. If anybody thinks that they can meet that standard, great, let's bring it forward and let's see, like, let's do the independent scientific proof. And that's our mindset. So this is for both of you, and I don't know who wants to go first, but we just want to know what made you want to support this Prove It First legislation, and what about it, and how can our members, now that the session's over and we're trying to build momentum for next year, how can our members help build momentum and take action?
To build, I would say, lobbying, reach out to your legislators, like any other subject, but, be more aggressive at it, because our natural land are shrinking, getting smaller and smaller. Development is coming in, and natural land out there are not as vast as used to be. And so I like to encourage folks, members from different part of our state to reach out to a legislator. And even though legislator that may be on your side, do reach out to them too. It's also show them that they are fighting the right battles, that people are paying attention to. And you may have someone in the legislature that fight for the protection of our boundary water, but at the same time, the legislature will be much appreciated to hear from you as well. So even though sometimes we're on your side, it's good to hear the mass supporter out there. So do consistently reach out to them, and have the great honor to be a co-author of the Prove It First bill. And so it didn't make much move in the Senate, and I'm happy to hear it. It's makes progress in the House, and Representative Her can talk a little bit more about that. But if we want to pursue mining, let's prove it first. Let's prove it first. And the state of Wisconsin give us a lot of example for that. I mean, they can prove it. So why should Minnesota be a test ground or a guinea pig to something that could be hazardous to our environment? One, our environment is contaminated by copper mining. There's no turning back. There's no turning back. And earlier, as you were asking about my background, and being that this is an Asian American Heritage Month, I thought back to my home country and the country of my ancestor. Even China, where commercial are exploiting our natural resource. And if we don't protect what we currently have now, one day we can't turn back. And I'm using my heritage going back to China, but if I were not a Southeast Asian descent person, if I were European descent person, I may have the same story too. Certain country exploit the environment, and it's what we can salvage now. So I need to take action and be a part of that change to protect our natural environment, starting here in Minnesota, and then to other part of the state, another part of the country, and use it example to educate my home country, in the country of my ancestor. So yeah, that's my answer to
that's
the
a
reason
great answer.
I co-author the Prove It bill.
We are grateful that you did, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you said, look, this is just not the right place. Not every place has that water, this water that we have in Minnesota, right?
Right.
We're not talking about just a random field or a random lake. We're talking about Lake Superior and the Boundary Waters. So it's
Right.
it's pretty unique places.
And if you're, I'm gonna throw a little humor here a little bit. If your stomach is as tough as mine, you can just drain off the water from the boundary water. You can just scoop with your hand and drink it off there. It's so pristine and clean. I mean, I don't advise for everyone.
Right. We cannot officially advise you of that just because it's not the exact same every single place, but no, absolutely. You're 100% right. And where else can you do that? Just stick your water bottle in the lake, and that's what I do too when you're up there, but absolutely. Representative Her, you want to talk a little bit about, your support for Prove It First and kind of where it is in the House and what our supporters can do to help?
Absolutely. And I just want to say that the reason why I supported this bill is because, I come from the private sector, and I watch too often companies who, first we didn't even hold them accountable to begin with, right? We would just allow people to mine, and then we would see all the devastation and pollution afterwards, and we'd say, oh my gosh, well, what should we do? And then, we started things like, having someone, before they mine, put a fund together for cleanup afterwards. And I always thought, doesn't make any sense. We're letting them pollute, and then we try to clean up. But what was happening was a lot of these companies, and this isn't just in Minnesota, this is everywhere, right, would go bankrupt before, or they would declare bankruptcy, and then they didn't have any money to clean up the pollutants that were left behind. And the fact that the earth cannot by itself clean these things up within our lifetime when we pollute them. And so maybe if we were left alone, the earth has ways to regenerate itself, but not at the pace that we're creating pollutants and destroying our earth. And so when the Prove It First bill came to, I was thinking, like, this is absolutely what makes sense. We should not wait until the back end. We should not ask people who will benefit by making millions, billions of dollars in profits to try to clean something up later, which will never be able to put it into its natural state again. And we should never allow it to happen to begin with. So why don't we just have them prove it first? And to Senator Her's point, that there are places that have been able to implement this, and there are learnings from that. And so I think that there is no better way for us to really protect our environment, but to say, let's not wait till the back end, let's do something on the front end. And so that to me is really critical. I think that makes complete sense for us to do that. In the House, because we are DFL led, there has been great support around this. I remember we had a lot of co-authors on this particular bill. Thank you to all of you, because there was a big push. I remembered when there were lots of emails going out to legislators asking them to support this. Representative Davney and Representative Morrison, who are really big, advocates for this bill, did a great job in pulling internal meetings and getting all of us on board and understanding what this was about. And so, we were able to make progress in the House on this issue, and that there's great support from our side of it. I think that, like all things, it's going to be a challenge. It's always a challenge when we have such a small majority in the House. Because we do have some Northern Minnesota legislators who are Democrats, but they also have a very conservative base. And, there are challenges within some of those legislators, not because they don't support this, but because there are a lot of viewpoints to take into consideration. But there's constant pushback from our GOP legislators as well. And it's always, we're given the false narrative, right? The false choice of that it is either you choose nature and you choose the wilderness, or you choose businesses and you support Northern Minnesota, and that's a false choice. I think that we can do both. We can protect our environment, and we can continue to support jobs in Northern Minnesota. And the way for us to do this is to have all of your voices. You get your friends and your neighbors, specifically in those districts that are held by GOP legislators, to get them to speak up, because you can send me notes, but you already know that I'm going to support you and I'm going to do this work. And so though I like to hear from you, and I think it's wonderful, it's not going to change the momentum on this work. The more we are able to connect with people who live in districts that are represented by a GOP representative or senator, that is where we're going to make the most gain. And that the more they hear from us, the more they have to include that in their platforms. We're all running again next year, right? Like we're 2 years, and because we're in a redistricting time, This is critical for everybody. So the more you get out there to put pressure on those particular senators and representatives, the more it's going to have to be talking an issue that they have to talk about during elections, and the more visibility we bring to ensuring that they actually act on this issue. So I would say really focus on connecting with your friends and your family and your loved ones who live in districts represented by GOP members. That is where we're going to make the greatest gain on this. So that's sort of my hope for what we can take away from what we can do after this.
Absolutely, well said. And I think that's a good thing that we try to remember here is, we definitely want to thank our reps, and let them know that we're with them and push them to be better. But we also need to connect across the aisle, and or we at least try. And at the Friends of the Boundary Waters, we are a nonpartisan organization. There's nothing I would love more than for the GOP to come out in favor of Prove It First. We think it's a common sense bill. It should not be partisan, and really all it does is put the burden of proof on the mining companies where it should be. And unfortunately, some people see a political opportunity in that. But we really think protecting Minnesota's water, clean water, should be nonpartisan, just common sense issue. So absolutely, getting the other people on board is critical. I have one more question, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. When we think about, our motto here at the Friends, right, is two minds, one threat. We say we're not for Twin Meadows, which is by the Boundary Waters, and we're not for Polymet, which is by Lake Superior. Those are two of our cleanest bodies of water. And there's some people that would say, well, Twin Meadows is bad because it's by the Boundary Waters, but Polymet is okay. But the problem with that is there's a really environmental justice side to that, because when we look at the Fond du Lac Band, who we're fortunate to work with a lot, and they've been doing an amazing job on their Polymet lawsuits. Their reservation is right downriver of the St. Louis River, and they have treaty rights to hunt, fish, get clean water from that land, and that was not being taken into account, with Polymet. And so that's an example for our work where we think about, environmental justice is a key part of our work. So can you talk a little bit about why environmental justice is so important, and then are there any areas where maybe the Hmong community is suffering from that? I know Representative Fu Lee introduced a bill this year to kind of target some of the communities that sometimes we see communities of color get more pollution or more air pollution and things like that. And so can you talk a little bit about that? Are there any issues that we should be aware of that people can kind of work on? So tell us why environmental justice is so important, and then are there areas that we should be looking for? And I'll start with Representative Her on this one.
Sure, and thank you, Scott, for that question, because that's the reason why this environmental work really matters to me, is that it should be around for everyone to use. But we know that when we talk about climate justice and environmental justice, that those who are the most disproportionately impacted by the pollutants that are our communities of color and low-income communities. The bill, I am in complete support of Representative Lee's bill. Last year, I introduced a bill with Kopal on doing cumulative impact when somebody renews a permit, and that is for any permit across the state for any reason. And because we know that those who are disproportionately impacted are communities of color and those who are from low-income communities. I would say that I think that it's important for us to remember that communities of color often, like I said, their sustenance comes from the earth. So whether it is things that come out of the water or things that are in the wild, that the ecosystem is all connected to each other. And so when we eat fish from polluted waters, when we eat fish, when we hunt meat from polluted lands, that is actually has detrimental impact on the health and well-being of communities of color, especially immigrant communities. And so I think that is really important. And I also, I agree with you, Scott, that the work that we do, right, our Native communities have been historically treated in ways in which we would never treat people now. And yet we continue then to put them in spaces in which we always put their land in the greatest jeopardy, and we put their air and their water in the greatest jeopardy. And that is something that we absolutely should keep top of mind. And I want to say that I think that people forget that our waterways and our land and our air, it doesn't stay isolated. So, when something happens in northern Minnesota, in an area, it doesn't stay in that. Those things spread out across our state. So I'll give you an example. I went to southern Minnesota, and we went to a cave where groundwater filters down to. And the way our ecosystem is set up and the way our ground is set up is that naturally our ground, the way the sediment is set up, is that it filters water naturally, right? But when pollutants come into the system, it ends up coming through all, no matter how much the earth was created in order to filter out pollutants, we now have created pollutants in ways that have permanently tainted our groundwater, right? And so, you know, farmers are digging deeper wells in order to get to fresh water. The people are you know, the water that we have access to, whether we swim in it or our fish are swimming in it, is more polluted. And so there are just some huge consequences, and that none of these things happen in isolation. So when we protect the boundary waters and how big it is and what we allow to be built around there, we're literally protecting everything else downstream from it. And that is absolutely critical, which means we're protecting our entire state. And when I was working with NCEL, the National Conference of Environmental Legislators, we were seeing that the down effects of, we don't think about what we do in Minnesota here in the most northern part, how that carries down into the Mississippi River, and then how that filters out into southern states. And those who have been impacted by climate change, by weather patterns, by ability to live off of their land is because of the pollutants that we start up here and everybody else adds, and it makes it down river. And so we have to remember that when we're protecting our air, our state here, we're protecting our waters here, we're literally protecting everybody else downstream from us. And that is absolutely critical. And so when we see the devastation around hurricanes and how that is impacting the most poorest and communities of color, when we see that the rivers now are no longer in their boundaries because of what we've done to them, when we see the pollutants that we put in and who is then eating the wildlife below us, we need to protect everyone. And what we do here matters, and it matters to the rest of our country as well. And so that's why I think it's really important to do, to really think about climate justice and environmental justice as we do this work in the boundary waters. I don't know if that answered your questions.
No, it does. It's great. And I think there's two things that I want to just reinforce that you hit on there. One, you know, I think sometimes our opponents think they forget that water flows, and which is a pretty basic thing. But you know, when we look at, like you just mentioned, right, Twin Meadows is not in the boundary waters, but it's on the river that flows into the boundary waters. Exactly. The Polymet is not on Lake Superior, but it's on the main tributary that flows into Lake Superior, right? And so that's something that seems obvious, but is not always kept in mind when we hear, well, it's not in the boundary waters, that's a problem. And so, yeah, that's absolutely a great point. And then when you also mentioned the Mississippi River, one of the reasons that we want Prove It First is because it applies to all mines in the future, you know, not just Twin Meadows, not just Polymet. There's others that are proposed, they're just not as far. And one of them is in the St. Croix River watershed, and one of them is in the Mississippi River watershed. So that's why we want Prove It First, because we need to have this baseline for as all these come up, so we're not fighting a 10-year fight every single time one of these mines comes up, because it's not just two, it's two right now, but it's going to be more. So you're 100% right on that. Senator Hurd, did you want to touch a little bit on the environmental justice side of things?
Yeah, you know, most of people of color in state of Minnesota live in, you know, poverty-stricken areas. You know, I mean, sad to say, but East Side, you know, and Frogtown are part of that, and I represent Great Mass, and we had no means of you know, saying we're going to change the air, you know, like a switch, just do a little, you know, like light switch, and then here the air change here in the metro, you know. So, you know, and it's a really breath of fresh air when you get to go to the boundary water, you know, allow folks here in the metro, you know, like children that are poor to be able to have the same experience and, you know, have the same quality of air at small point in time, you know, is crucial and is important. So, you know, a proponent of environmental justice, but one thing, and Representative Hurd talking great length about it, but I just want to point out that I'm in strong solidarity with my indigenous community up, you know, in the northern part of our state. And so if there's going to be any change to policy, bring them to the table. And if they agree, then, you know, I, as an indigenous person who's from Southeast Asia, would go along. But if you not bring them to the table, make decision on your own, then how could you be fair in terms of equity or environmental justice? You know, thinking back in the old days, you know, like I'm sure indigenous culture would say, we'll just leave it to the advancement of those who would have new discovery here, and maybe you be a good caretaker. I think my ancestor think very much like what maybe the indigenous ancestor here too. We're gonna pass this to you and hope that you will take good care of it. But that's not true. People take advantage, the prevailing culture kind of take advantage of our natural wonder that we need to preserve, and both the indigenous community and our new American community, whether it's Hmong, Somali, we are live in a poor community, and if we don't care for little that we have in terms of environmental quality, it will impact all of us, especially, and it will impact us disproportionately, especially for people that live in the poor area of our state. So thank you for the question.
Absolutely. No, those are some great answers. And, I think one thing that's always important to keep in mind when we're having these conversations about the boundary waters and Lake Superior and Superior, it was all indigenous land first, right? We're coming here, when I say we, I mean the white people, right? We came here and said, hey, look, we're essentially taking this, and that's obviously a much longer conversation than we can have today. But it's important to remember that, they are the original stewards of this land. They want what's best for it, and we really need to listen to them. And I think one of the things that was most shocking about, and we'll probably have another webinar about this at another point, but, about there's been a number of developments with the Polymet mine recently, and one of the most shocking was the impact that on Native communities downstream was not even considered. And that's not me saying that, that's a federal judge saying that, and that's the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers having to go back because a federal judge said, you did not consider this like you're supposed to. That's a basic step. And yet we hear Minnesota has this incredible environmental review system that would never let a bad project through, right? Which is not true. But that's certainly something that we try to remember. We do have a couple time for just a couple questions here. I'm going to actually answer this first one. Are there mines that can be used as good examples of doing it without all the awful pollution? The answer is no. I think that if there was, we would have seen it by now. Like Senator Her mentioned, this was a law approved first, was a law in Wisconsin for 20 years. Not a single mine was permitted. And in fact, they had to repeal it. Governor Scott Walker at the time, the governor, he had to repeal it because they wanted to permit a mine. And you look at the proof that's offered to us, which is usually Eagle Mine or Flambeau Mine, both of which are much smaller than these mines would be, but they both still polluted. And so that's why we want independent scientific proof, because what a lot of people don't realize is that our permits aren't for not polluting at all. They allow some polluting, and in other states they allow some polluting, and this is just not an environment for that. So we're very confident that there's no mines that meet that. So we have another question from, we have a question, this is for Senator Her. Have you had a chance, have you ever been able to hear the loons on Lake Phelan? This is new for us after 45 years of living here.
Oh yes, I forgot to check this year, and last year, 2020, because of COVID-19 restrictions, so I stay mostly indoor, although I had a chance to explore, take a cruise to Boundary Water like I always do last year, every year. But there is, in 2018, and I was surprised to see lots of loon at Phelan Lake. And if you have sighted this year, let me know. I think they come around, but I was surprised to see in 2017, 2018, where loon just landed at Lake Phelan, and it's quite intriguing. I think that it depends on certain years. I think if the lake still frozen up north, then they will stay at Lake Phelan temporarily. So I hope that they come every year. Yes, I did witness that too, that there, lots of loon at Lake Phelan at certain times of the years, yes. And they cried beautifully, if the caller in the future meet me in person, I do know how to whistle like a loon using my hand, but I don't want to do it right now because it might become too humorous to men to
we'll have a special event just for that. We can do that.
Yes.
Well, we are running out of time here, so I don't want to go over, but thank you so much to Senator Her and Representative Her for joining us and for supporting Prove It First and just generally being champions for clean water in Minnesota. We really, really appreciate it. I would say that if anybody has any questions that we weren't able to get to, my email is scott@friends-bwca.org. I'll put this in you can put this in the chat real quick while I'm talking here. Feel free to shoot me an email, give me a call at any time. And thank you to the representative and the senator for joining us. We've had a great time, and we'll talk soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.